Hello, I'm Hector Perez from Dev School. Welcome to this new video, which is a graphical interface challenge to replicate a dribble design in .NET MAUI. This time, I found this design that looks quite spectacular by Tamara called Tail Reader. It's a graphical interface to display some kind of children's story collection. The screen simply looks amazing. If you want to download the source code to follow this tutorial video, you can do so at the link you'll find as part of the description. I also invite you to leave a comment to let me know if you like this kind of graphical interface challenges. With that said, let's begin. We're going to start with the graphical interface challenge. To do this, we'll analyze the design on Dribble to replicate it. The creator of this design provides us with a link to Figma in the description, where we can see the design in more detail. We can learn about the colors used, the font used, and all the details about this application. So I think it's a pretty good design to be replicated in .NET MAUI. Let's analyze the layout of the graphical interface. We need to extract the information about how many sections we need to replicate it in .NET MAUI. A first section would be this fairy tales title. A second section would be the search bar you see on the screen. A third section would be the set of gallery images. Another section would be this indicator view. Another section would be the recommended for you title. And finally, the last section would be this last gallery you see at the bottom, where recommendations of children's stories are displayed. Once we know this, let's go to Visual Studio. I've already created a blank project, and I've removed all the pre-created code to have a blank project. Another thing I've done is set main page as the main page, since we're only going to use one page as part of this demonstration. Similarly, I have cleaned up all the source code, the XAML code, and the code behind of this file. Now, let's start writing code. We will begin by defining a grid with a background color equal to 0D0118, the color shown in the Figma file. We will create a set of rows, indicating that we need 5% for the first row. The second row will have 10%, the third row 45%, the next row another 5%, the following row another 5%, and the last row will have 30%. This is according to the measurements we have obtained from the Figma file. Once this is done, we will start writing the title using a label control. We will indicate a font size equal to 16, horizontal options equal to center, text equal to fairy tales, text color equal to white, and vertical options equal to center. With these changes made, we will start the application in the Android emulator. After waiting a few seconds, we see the application and can observe the label control at the top displaying the application title. However, the design's font family has a font family called Epilogue. This is the font name. We will import the necessary font or fonts to complete the graphical interface challenge. In the folder called Resources, I will import the two necessary fonts into the Fonts folder. I'm going to import the pair of fonts that you can see on the screen, Epilogue Medium and the Fontello font, which contains the set of icons to add to the application in the future. Once we have imported the fonts, we need to register them in the MAUI program. I'm going to copy one of these lines and put the name of the font, which is Epilogue Medium, and give it an alias, Epilogue. We will also duplicate this line to register the Fontello font with an alias equal to icons. Once we have done this, I will restart the emulator. When we have started the application again, we will go to the file inside the styles folder called styles.xaml. As we want to assign this font to all the label controls we will use throughout the application. We will look for the style that affects all the label controls. We will modify the font family property and indicate that we want to use the font called Epilogue. This will automatically change the font applied to this label control, as you have seen. Once we have modified or assigned the font family, we will create this search bar element in the application. We will first deal with this curved background part. To do this, we return to mainpage.xaml file. We will create a grid that we will position in row number 1. We will give it a margin of 25, 10, 25, 10 to provide space between the elements. Within this grid, we will create a round rectangle to add a curved shape at the ends. We will indicate that we want to place this round rectangle in row number 1. We want a corner radius of 25, a fill of 311B45, and a height request of 45. Upon saving the changes, we can see this background that looks quite similar to the file in Figma. In fact, we realize that this grid.row is not needed as part of this assignment. Once we have written the round rectangle, we will create the search bar control on top of this background that we have created through the round rectangle. We specify search bar as the control name and assign some properties, such as the cancel button color property in white. We will indicate that we want a placeholder that says search by name, a placeholder color equal to AC9DB9, a text color equal to white, and its vertical options equal to center. Upon saving the changes, we can appreciate that we now have this nice search bar control as part of the application. However, there is an element that you surely already noticed that does not match the design as much. It is this icon that you can see on the screen. We will modify the code behind of this file to change that color. On this occasion, we will only make the handler for Android, but you can do it perfectly for any other platform. I'm going to the code behind of this page, mainpage.xaml.cs, and I'm going to create an invocation to a method called modifySearchBar as part of the constructor. We have to create this method, as it doesn't currently exist. As part of this method, I'm going to copy and paste a section of code, so I don't have to be writing this handler or have any kind of error when coding it. Here we are doing some code to simply change the color of the search icon. With this change, if we run the application again, you can see that the color of the search icon has been modified satisfactorily. Okay, with this, we have concluded the search bar section that seems complicated, but actually isn't that much. We'll continue with the part that I think is the most complicated of the design, which is this kind of slider with different recommended stories for whoever uses the app. We're going to recreate this first part, which is the rounded image. For that, we go back to the XAML code, and after the layout grid that is in row number 1, we're going to create the control we need. But before that, we need information or data to fill that carousel. I'm going to stop the execution of the application. I'm going to the Solution Explorer, and as part of the Explorer, I'm going to add a new folder. This folder is going to be called, for example, Models. As part of the folder, I'm going to create a new class, and this class is going to be called Fairy Tale. I'm going to copy the pre-created model, a class called Fairy Tale with 4 properties. The first property is called Name, the second is called Read Time, the third is called IsSaved, and the fourth is called Image. We do not really need this third property. If we wanted to implement some functionality to save a story, we could use it, but in our case, I deleted it because it won't be used. Once we've done this, we return to the code behind of our XAML file. Remember that this could also be done perfectly from a view model. I'm going to create a couple of collections through public observable collection that have Fairy Tale as a generic. The first one will be called Fairy Tales with its get and set, so that we can invoke it from the XAML file. I'm going to import the necessary namespace. I'm going to create a copy of this collection. I will call it Fairy Tales 2, solely for the purpose of being able to display the pair of collections in a different order. Now that I've created this pair of collections, I'm going to go to the constructor. I'm going to invoke a method called initializeTales that we haven't created yet. And finally, we're going to assign the binding context to the value of this. I'll let Visual Studio create this method called initializeTales, and I'm going to copy and paste a section of code that I've previously created as well. To skip the code writing process, we'll initialize the Fairy Tales property with new instances of observable collections and generics. We create a series of properties such as name, reading time, and the isSaved property, which we will remove from here. An image is also assigned to different image files that we have not yet imported. Now that we have created these two collections, we can return to the XAML main page and create a carousel view element. We'll indicate that it will be located in row number 2 and bind the carousel to the property called Fairy Tales, which is the first list. We close the carousel definition, and as part of the carousel, we will also create a data template. So I'll indicate carouselView.itemTemplate, and within it, I'll specify a data template. As part of the data template, I'll create a grid layout to add different elements. This grid will contain a set of rows through row definitions. The first row will be 20%, the second row will be 60%, and the last row will be the remaining 20%. With this, we will define each of the carousel elements. Let's start by defining the rounded image. How can we do this? On this occasion, we will use a border control, which we will position or indicate to have a row span equal to 3. Why do I define a row as the data template with 3 different rows? Well, this will be the general data template, indicating that in the first section we will place this type of marker. The second section is to provide a space between the marker and the bottom part or the text of the bottom part. That's why I define a grid with 3 rows. As part of the first row, I will indicate the border that has those 3 available spaces or that occupies those 3 spaces. We will indicate that we want a background color equal to 311B45, a height request equal to 300. It is important to place a stroke equal to 6E557C, a stroke shape that will help us give it that rounded border. We will indicate round rectangle 30, 30, 30, 30, wanting each of the corners to be rounded with a value of 30 units. A stroke thickness equal to 2 units and a width request equal to 300. We do this because you can see that the image has a border that is very slightly visible, of a purple-like color. This stroke will help us define that part. We save the changes to see how they look in the emulator. We start the execution of the application. Done! Once the application has been initialized, we can now see this beautiful border. We can see that the carousel contains each of these borders and it looks quite good. Here is where we will place the desired image. As part of this border and content, we will specify that we want an image control with an aspect equal to aspect fill and a source equal to binding to the property called image. For this to work correctly, we must import the images, since we are binding to the property called image. As part of this folder called resources, in the folder called images, I will import the necessary set of images. I have already imported them. They are this set of images that you can see their preview when I hover the cursor over each of them. With this import I have made, I will restart the execution of the application to see how this change looks. With this change introduced, you can see that the image is displayed spectacularly, being rounded and having this border that looks quite good as well. The next step is to recreate this glow effect that appears around each of the images. To do this, we will use a shadow to highlight each of the carousel elements. As part of the border, we will indicate that we want to access the property called shadow to create a new shadow, with some properties such as the brush property equal to C283FT. We will indicate that we want an opacity of 0.7, a radius to know how much this shadow extends equal to 100 units, and an offset equal to 0.0, as we want this shadow to start from the center of the same image. I'm going to close the tag and save the changes. Look how we now have this nice glow on each of the images in a very simple way. The next step is to place each of the texts that are part of the description of the images. To do this, I go back to the XAML file, and after the border control that we see here, I'm going to create a vertical stack layout that I'm going to position in row number 2. I close this tag, and inside the vertical stack layout I'm going to indicate that I want a label control with a text equal to a binding to the property called readTime. We're going to apply a string format equal to single quotes, readTime, colon. Within braces, we're going to place 0, which is the value of the binding, colon, I put a percentage symbol, and finally a lowercase m to change the format of the time span so that it only shows the minutes that are part of the time span. And finally, I conclude the string with the text means. I close this definition with quotes and also indicate that I want a text color equal to white. I'm going to save the changes, and you can already see that we have here read time and the number of minutes in each of the stories. Next, after this first label, I'm going to create another label control with a font size equal to large, indicating that the text will be equal to binding to the property called name, which is the name of the story, and a text color equal to white. I close this tag, save the changes, and now we have here this pair of label controls that show us the description of each of the stories. However, we can see a problem. Each of the elements we want to add as part of this border will always be somewhat restricted by the size of the image plus the border plus the shadow that you can see on the screen. I think the ideal would be to work directly with the content of the border to be able to take as reference each of the edges of the border to handle the margin and have the elements inside in a very simple way. To achieve this goal, instead of having the border directly assigned an image control, I will indicate that I want a grid control and within the grid control, the image control. As we have modified, or as what we want is to work directly within the border, I will remove the row definitions that are part of the data template container, and I will paste this definition of the rows as part of this grid that we have previously created. With this, we would have to indicate that this image, which is inside the grid that we have created, has a grid.rowspan equal to 3, so that it covers all the content directly. Let's save the changes to see that everything looks correct. We see that the image still looks correct, and now that we have this ready, we can take the vertical stack layout, cut it and paste it into this new grid that we have specified. With this, I will save the changes once more, and now you can see the text within the border. In a very simple way, we can directly modify the margin of the vertical stack layout and assign it a margin, for example, 20,0,0,0. By saving the changes, we now have each of the titles here that look quite good. Having solved this issue, the next step is to add the bookmark icon as part of the image. To do this, as part of this grid that we have defined after the vertical stack layout, I will create a label control and assign it some properties such as the margin equal to 0,20,20,0. I will indicate that the font family will be equal to icons, which was the font we previously registered with the icon set. The font size will be equal to 25, the horizontal options will be equal to end, and the text will be equal to ampersand symbol, hash symbol, XF097, semicolon, which is the code of the icon we want to use. Finally, the text color will be equal to white. By closing this tag and saving the changes, you can now see this icon displayed as part of the image satisfactorily. Now let's go back to the Figma file and see what else we can do. As part of the design, we can appreciate a small part of each of the previous and next elements. How can we achieve this in .NET MAUI? We can achieve it in a very simple way. We have to go to the carousel definition or carousel view, and we have a property called Pick Area in Sets. We can assign it a value, for example 30. This property allows us to indicate that we want to see a small part of another of the elements, and this area that we're going to visualize can be modified through this property or this value. In this way, if we go back to the emulator, we can see that we can now view each of the previous and next elements, or we can see a small part of each of these elements satisfactorily. We will modify some additional options, and we can do this through the items layout property. Before the item template, or it could also be after, we will indicate carousel view.itemsLayout. As part of the items layout definition, we will indicate that we want a linear items layout, specify a spacing of 0 units, a horizontal orientation, and we have a couple of properties, one called Snap Points Alignment. This property allows us to establish the visible part of each of the carousel elements and snap points type, which will allow us to specify the functionality or how or where the carousel will stop at each of the elements. In our case, we will indicate that we want to see each of the elements that are part of the carousel without the user being able to move very quickly to the next element. This is what the mandatory single property is for. We will implement the changes, test this functionality, and it is this functionality that you can see on the screen that gives us a better view as part of the carousel. Another detail that we are seeing at the moment is that in some of the images, especially the very light ones, the text gets a bit lost. If we look at the design in Figma, you can appreciate that the text looks quite good because there is a layer that is basically a somewhat dark gradient at the bottom that gets lighter towards the top. We're going to simulate this with .NET MAUI using a round rectangle. After the image control, the one you can see here, we will place that intermediate layer not to darken the text, but only to darken the image. We will create a round rectangle control and indicate that it will have a row span equal to 3 to use all the available space. A corner radius equal to 30 to have the same radius as the image. We will also indicate the same size of the images through height request and width request equal to 300 and an opacity equal to 0.7. As part of the round rectangle, we will create a gradient through roundRectangle.fill. We will create a linear gradient brush with an endpoint equal to 0.1 to have the gradient from top to bottom. Finally, we will create a first gradient stop with an offset equal to 0 and a color equal to transparent, since we want the top part to be transparent so as not to darken the image in any specific color at the top. To have a darker color at the bottom, we will create another gradient stop with an offset equal to 1 and a somewhat dark color through the color 030005, which is a black-like color. Let's save the changes and observe the gradient in the emulator. It is necessary to restart the application to display it correctly. Now, the text looks better thanks to the gradient applied from the bottom to the top. The issues with the light text have been resolved. We have finished creating the carousel view control. The only thing left is to add a control that lets us know which element we are on. We will use an indicator view control for this. Let's go back to the XAML file. collapse the carousel, and create an indicator view control. Let's assign a name to the indicator view, position it in row number 3 with horizontal options equal to center, and an indicator color equal to 616161. An indicator size equal to 8, a selected indicator color equal to white, vertical options equal to center. The indicator view offers various customizations options. We must also assign which indicator we want to work together with the carousel. We will indicate that the carousel view in its indicator view property will be equal to the indicator view. This is the name we gave to the indicator view we created earlier. Let's recompile the application to apply these changes and see how the design looks. You can see that the view indicator does not appear, as I have made a mistake here and I needed an A. After correcting this, I will restart the execution of the application. Now we have the view indicator at the bottom that shows us which element we are currently on. With this, we have finished this section of the carousel and the indicator section. The next step is to create this recommendation section for the stories. To do this, I will create a label control after the indicator control. I write a label control, which we will position in row number 4. We will assign it a margin equal to 25,10, a font size equal to 16, a text that is equal to recommended for you, a text color equal to white, and its vertical options equal to center. With what we have done, we save the changes, return to the emulator, and we can now see this header that says recommended for you. The next step is to create the second gallery with recommendations for users. After the label control that we have created, we will create a collection view control that we will position in row number 5, and item source equal to a binding to the property Fairy Tales 2. Now we can have full control over the spacing in each of the elements. Let's create a linear items layout with an item spacing of 25 and horizontal orientation. Let's close this tag and then define the data template through collection view.itemTemplate. We will create a grid layout with a height request of 200 units and a width request of 200 units as well. Within the grid, to replicate these images with rounded corners, we will create a border control with a height request of 200 units, horizontal options equal to center, a stroke equal to 6E557C, and a stroke shape equal to round rectangle. We will indicate that we want a corner radius of 20 units for each of the corners, a stroke thickness of 2, and a width request of 200 units. This is done because each of the elements also has a border with a slight purple color. For the border, we will create a new image control with an aspect equal to aspect fill and a source equal to binding to the image property. I save the changes, and now you can see this gallery with each of the images we have created correctly. Alright, we have the main part of the application. The only thing left would be this menu at the bottom. How can we create it? After the collection view, I'm going to create a grid that I will position in the last row, that is grid.row equal 5. I'm going to assign it a margin of 15, 0, 15, 0, a height request of 75, and those vertical options equal to end. This is because I want to place a new grid that is positioned right in front of this last gallery of the collection view. Within the grid, I want to create a border control to which I will assign a background color equal to 311B45, a stroke equal to 6E557C, a stroke shape equal to round rectangle with a corner radius equal to 30 units for each side, and a stroke thickness equal to 2 units. If I save the changes at this moment, you can already see this menu section at the bottom with the features we have assigned. we will divide each of the spaces with a grid with each of the rows and columns to position both the text and each of the icons. Inside the border control, we're going to create a new grid with 4 columns, each of them measuring the same space. We will also define a set of rows, 2 rows, and a row spacing of 3 units to slightly distance the size of the rows or to specify this amount in the separation of each of the rows. What we're going to do within the grid control is simply create a set of label controls. The first label will be positioned in row number 1. It will have a font size of 10 units, horizontal options equal to center with a text that says home and a text equal to white. I close this label, save the changes, and you can now see in the emulator this label that refers to the main page, and we have placed it in white since it will show the user the current page they are on. I'm going to copy the label control, paste it 3 times, and this is because I want to modify the grid.column property. I'm going to place the next label in column number 1 and change the text. Instead of saying home, it will say search. I will do the same with the following elements. That is, I will copy this grid.column property, paste it, change the value to a value of 2, and the name or text will be equal to library. I do this once more, changing the value to value of 3 for the column and the text to be equal to profile. Save the changes to see that everything is fine, and we can now see that each of the text is already in the corresponding location. In this section, I will create each of the icons. To do this, I will copy the last control label, paste it, and remove the grid.row property, as the element will be located in row number 0. I will modify the grid.column property. Since it's the first element, there is no need to specify it. I will indicate that the font family will be equal to icons, modify the font size to a value of 20, and change the text to an ampersand symbol, hashtag symbol XE80D, which is the identifier of the icon I want to use. The text color will be white, and the vertical options will be set to end. I will save the changes to make sure everything looks correct, and now we can see the icon successfully. I will copy this control and modify the grid.column property to place the next element in column number 1. I will change the text to E800. After saving these changes, we can see the second icon correctly. Once again, I will copy and paste the control label, place it in column number 2, and change the text to E823. I will save the changes, and now we can see the next icon correctly. One more time, I will duplicate the control label, change the column to column number 3, and set the value to E801. I save the changes, and that's it. Now we can see our finished menu. The last thing we have to do is change this color so that we have a different color for the selected page. As part of the color will be equal to AC9DB9. I'm going to copy the text color property, paste it to the previous element and also the one before that. Save the changes, and now we can see that the color of the icons is different. I'm going to do the same for the label controls that display the text of the section name. I'm going to modify the text color of the second label control as well as the third and fourth controls. I save the changes, and that's it. We have now completed the graphical interface design in Figma. If we compare the design, you can see that it has turned out quite well, quite similar to what the Figma design has shown us. With this, we have concluded this design. I hope you liked it. Remember to leave me a comment if you like this type of challenge or what kind of challenges you would like to see and what else you would like to learn about .NET MAUI. I also invite you to subscribe to the channel. Like this video and click on the bell so that you receive notifications as soon as I release new graphical interface challenge videos about .NET MAUI or .NET in general. See you in the next video.